KTM, despite its well-publicized financial problems, check out my video on those in the top right corner, continues to work on new models. And my feeling is that had these models been out earlier, perhaps the company wouldn't be in the situation it finds itself right now. Hot on the heels of the release of models like the 390 Enduro R and SM, as well as the most important of all, the new 390 Adventure R and S versions, we now have spy photos that appear to be an almost production-ready 690 Adventure R, basically a 690 Enduro R with a fairing and bigger tanks. And if you've been following the adventure bike market over the last couple of years, you will know that this is pretty much the ultimate off-road capable adventure motorcycle that adventure riders have been asking for. How will this bike look, when is it coming, and how can it save KTM in the future? Stay tuned for the details. And if you're enjoying the content, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing it with friends. The adventure bike market picked up steam in the mid-2000s with the release of Long Way Round, a British TV show in which Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman rode their enormous BMW GSs around the world. Almost. And so the popularity of big adventure motorcycles exploded, resulting in every manufacturer bringing big, powerful ADV models to market. However, once the Gore-Tex crowd all ran out and bought these bikes, it became obvious that while they make amazing pavement tours, they are too big and heavy to be ridden confidently off-road by regular folks. Yes, Ricky Carmichael can look like a god on one, but we're not Ricky Carmichael. And so riders started demanding smaller motorcycles in an effort to find that sweet spot between just enough power to be seriously sporty on the road as well as keep up on the highway, and enough lightness and suspension travel to excel off-road. I've owned a few of these motorcycles and still own one, the Yamaha Tenere 700, which has the power, 72 horses, but is a bit too heavy for serious gnarly off-roading at 450 pounds. Another was my wife's Honda CRF 300L Rally, which had the lighter weight, 340 pounds, but lacked the power with 26 horses. Since these two bikes came out, many 40-plus horsepower lighter bikes have hit the market, but most of them are still a bit on the heavy side, and while 40-plus horsepower is good, it's not 70-plus horsepower. KTM's own 390 Adventure R is close to that sweet spot with 44 horsepower and a sub 400-pound weight. However, a 690 Adventure R with 74 horsepower and probably even a lighter weight seems right on target to be that all-elusive perfect unicorn bike. You see, the 390, being an A2 legal bike, not only has to stay under 47 horsepower, but also cannot be too light. There's a maximum power to weight ratio which requires builders to keep the weight up in addition to keeping the power down. Meanwhile, not being an A2 bike, the 690 doesn't need to worry about that, so it can be lighter than the 390. And since this new 690 Adventure R looks almost identical to the 690 Enduro R but with a few additional parts, this motorcycle promises to be the ultimate ADV mount. The 690 Enduro R is the best performing lower maintenance dual sport. Yes, there are lighter and better performing street legal dirt bikes like KTM's own 500 EXC, but those require oil changes every 15 to 25 hours of use, depending on how they're being ridden, and valve checks every 50 hours. Meanwhile, you can go 6,200 miles or 10,000 kilometers between oil changes and valve adjustments on the 690. The current Enduro R has specs that could make the average ADV rider drool with envy. In addition to the 74 horsepower and 54 pound-feet of torque out of the 693cc liquid-cooled single, its wet weight is somewhere between 350 and 360 pounds, pretty light for such a powerful bike. Suspension travel is almost 10 inches on both sides with 10.6 inches of ground clearance, and that WP Explore suspension is awesome. It's not some squishy pogo stick. Fuel capacity is 3.6 gallons or 13.6 liters, and the whole package is pretty decent off-road. However, what distinguishes the 390 from other dual sports is its road performance. This thing holes on twisty roads and can pretty much keep up with or pull away from most mid-sized adventure bikes. And it does decently well on the highway, but is a bit hampered by its light weight. It's never going to be as stable or comfortable on the highway as a 500-pound Africa Twin. Still, the trade-off for superior dirt performance is worth it to many riders. So you might ask, why hadn't KTM made an adventure version of the 690 a long time ago? And the answer is they did. A long time ago. Back between 1997 and 2007, KTM had the 640 Adventure, a dual sport with a fairing and a massive 28-liter gas tank. And presumably they discontinued it due to lack of sales. This was the era of the big and growing multi-cylinder adventure motorcycles, the KTM 990 Adventure R being one of them. And that's what customers wanted back then. Then riders discovered how heavy these bikes felt off-road and started looking for something lighter. And frankly, this is where, a few years ago, KTM dropped the ball. They could have introduced the 690 Adventure R 5 or 6 years ago when the Tenere 700 and the Touareg 660 were coming out. The demand was clearly there, and there's a huge cottage industry of people buying 690s and adventurizing them with aftermarket tanks, fairings, and rally towers. And although doing this has always been a possibility, there's something to be said for a bike that is purpose-built and dialed in from the factory to do the job. And that's where this new bike comes in. The motorcycle that was spied being tested appears to be very similar to the 690 Enduro R, but with several adventure-oriented parts bolted on. We see a tall windscreen shielding a larger display, presumably one that is much more comprehensive than the Enduro's basic unit. This setup looks like a proper rally bike similar to the 390 Adventure R. The display is integrated into a rally tower, which should put it closer to your line of sight than the lower down Enduro one. The dual LED headlight looks mean, and thankfully KTM is ditching the Decepticon insectoid look. Additionally, this bike adds 2 front-mounted fuel tanks to the one that already exists below the seat. That could mean potentially doubling current fuel capacity to somewhere in the range of the old 640 Adventure, around 27 or 28 liters. Of course, this motorcycle would weigh more than the current 690 Enduro. You'd have 30 extra pounds of fuel alone, never mind what the fairing and the dash add. Suspension settings would have to be tweaked accordingly to handle a different weight distribution. But even with the added parts, KTM could keep the wet weight under 390 pounds, and no one says you have to ride this thing off-road with a full tank. Adventure riders could do their long-distance touring with a full tank, but hit the trails with the tank more than half empty, which would make this bike weigh in not too far north of the Enduro model. One concern I would have would be the Enduro's lofty seat height of 910mm or 35.8 inches, definitely not ideal for people with shorter inseams. However, offering factory lowering links and thinner seats as options could make this platform far more attractive to shorter riders. And I'm guessing that the side-mounted tanks will keep the center of gravity low enough not to make this bike feel too top-heavy. Another concern would be reliability, which is always an issue hounding KTM. Generally, the 690 engine does not have a terrible reputation, but if you read the forums, there are lots of complaints about electrical gremlins, fuel pumps, and other issues. However KTM looks after they emerge from this restructuring, one thing is clear. They need to get fanatical about reliability, because if people can't feel confident in taking a bike like this on a long tour, they will not buy it and KTM will be back where it started. I'd even be willing to give up a few horsepower for improved reliability. Would the experience of this motorcycle be any different if, say, instead of 74 horsepower, it had 68? I doubt anyone would notice, but a noticeable improvement in reliability would go a long way to bringing in interested riders. Royal Enfield managed to change its reputation for reliability, and KTM needs to get on this pronto if they want to survive. The most powerful bike in the world doesn't do you much good if it won't start. The final question surrounds price. The 690 Enduro R cost $13,000 US and 15,800 Canadian dollars, so these bikes ain't cheap. And of course, having some extra parts on it, the Adventure variant will cost more. How much more? Hopefully 1,000 or 2,000 extra and not much more than that. How much does a transparent fairing, a plastic tank, and a TFT display cost to manufacture? I'm not an expert, but it's gotta be under $2,000. Let's hope that KTM doesn't price this bike way out of the means of the average adventure buyer. And if it's still too much, there's always the 390. So I'm excited and hope that KTM pulls out of this nosedive they're in. I've always loved the company's commitment to performance and racing, though I don't love that it came at the price of reliability. This bike would sell like hotcakes if customers could build some trust in the company's staying power and the bike's reliability. It looks pretty close to being production ready, and my guess is that it will be introduced at EICMA Motorcycle Show in November, and KTM sorely needs it to be a hit. Would I trade in my Tenere 700 for it? I'd consider it. Between this bike and the new Kawasaki KLE 500 coming out soon, I could be tempted to part with the old T7. We'll see. But what do you think of this bike? Are you a potential buyer? Can this thing save KTM? Should I trade in my Yamaha? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Check out some of these other videos you might enjoy. Ride safe, and may the spokes be with you.